Welcome back to another episode on the Law Rapport. This is episode 22, and today we are going to discuss the matter of the 7 Sri Lankans who were awarded damages by the Supreme Court for unlawful detention and false imprisonment. The Sri Lankans were among a group of 29 that came to the Turks and Caicos Islands illegally via a Haitian sloop. Back in 2019, they were captured and detained by the Immigration Department. 4 of the Sri Lankans were awarded $76,500 in damages, and the other 3 Sri Lankans were awarded $75,700 in damages. I'll be back shortly to discuss the details of the case, but before I do, my usual disclaimer: this is not legal advice, should not be construed as a legal advice. For legal advice, please contact a lawyer of your choice. Welcome back. The Sri Lankans first challenged their detention in the Supreme Court on the 4th of May 2020. The Supreme Court handed down its decision. The issues before the court at that time were: 1, whether or not the detention of the Sri Lankans were lawful according to law; 2, whether or not the delay in their repatriation affected the legality of their detention; and 3, whether or not the Sri Lankans, who were the applicants in this case, were entitled to the relief sought on the papers before the court. The court, in its decision handed down on the 4th of May 2020, held or ruled that the delay was lawful, that the delay in the repatriation was justified, and that the government had discharged the burden that the detention was lawful. The Sri Lankans, not daunted by this decision, through their legal representatives, appealed this decision to the Turks and Caicos Islands Court of Appeal. A decision in relation to the appeal was handed down on the 31st of December 2020. It was a majority decision, meaning of the 3 judges hearing the case, 2 agreed that the detention was unlawful. 1 judge was of a different opinion. So, in essence, the appeal was allowed, and costs was awarded, including their cost in the court below. Now, what the court held, it was that the detention was unlawful, and in essence, it amounted to false imprisonment. And when the phrase or the term cost awarded or cost allowed is used, it means a reasonable cost or reasonable legal cost incurred by the appellants. Now, the Sri Lankans were held pursuant to Section 54 of the Immigration Ordinance. And the court in essence held that the Immigration Department had no power to hold detainees for the police to conduct a criminal investigation. Now, what happened is that the Immigration Department, it appears, had suspected that the detainees were either the victim of human trafficking, human smuggling, or the war, or some members of the group were perhaps the perpetrators of human smuggling. The Immigration Department determined that they didn't have the capacity to embark on such a complex investigation, and so they seek the assistance of the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands police force. It turns out that the police themselves determined that they didn't have the capacity to conduct such a complex and challenging investigation, so they sought assistance from the United Kingdom. Well, this process took some time because it meant that the cabinet had to approve extra funds in order for the investigation to be conducted. In the meantime, the Sri Lankans were still held in detention. Now, Section 54 of the Immigration Ordinance empowers the Immigration Department to detain persons to consider whether they should grant or refuse leave to enter the Turks and Caicos Islands, or for the purpose of determining whether a person should be deported. And what the court essentially held is that once it became a criminal investigation, that the Immigration Department had no powers to hold someone indefinitely in detention while a criminal investigation was being conducted. And in my respectful view, once a criminal investigation had commenced, that the Sri Lankans were subject to Section 31 of the Magistrate Court Ordinance, which in essence says that a person in detention being investigated for criminal offense should be brought before a magistrate as soon as practicable, or granted bail. And so once there was a criminal investigation, the only powers that the investigators had, in my view, was to hold the people under criminal investigation for 48 hours and then make a determination whether or not they are going to be charged or bailed. And if charged, it was likely, in my respectful view, that they would have been remanded into lawful custody. But to hold them at the detention center, in my view, the court was correct in holding that their detention was unlawful and that they were effectively held as a matter of being falsely imprisoned. Now, I will be back shortly to discuss the award of damages. The Sri Lankans were awarded collectively $532,500. And I will just read briefly from the head note of the case, which determined the amount to be awarded to each of the applicant. And bear in mind, only 7 took this matter to court in relation to damages. I understand that some of the Sri Lankans initially involved had already left the Turks and Caicos Islands. Now, the head note to the case reads as follows. These consolidated proceedings concern the assessment of damages for false imprisonment. The plaintiffs entered the Turks and Caicos Islands illegally and were apprehended and detained at the Immigration Detention Center for different periods of either 316 or 320 days. The plaintiff subsequently filed claims seeking damages for false imprisonment, breaches to their constitutional rights, and exemplary damages. The defendants admitted liability. In assessing damages, the court's consideration included the plaintiff's initial shock of the forced arrest, their injury to liberty, injury to their feelings, including loss of reputation, humiliation, and disgrace, their pain and suffering, their loss of enjoyment of lives, their period of detention, the considerations of the detention center, and aggravating factors, including the need to vindicate the breaches of their constitutional rights. The court declined to award exemplary damages on the ground that the damages awarded were adequate compensation for false imprisonment and to vindicate the plaintiff's constitutional right. This decision of the court was handed down on the 12th of May. Now I understand a lot of persons in the community have been critical of the judge in this case. I hope that persons bear in mind that the Court of Appeal held that the detention was unlawful. And another thing that should be borne in mind is that the defendants, the Attorney General and Director of Immigration at the time, accepted liability, and all the court had to do was to determine the amount of damages to be awarded. And so any criticism of the judge in this matter, in my view, is unfounded, unfortunate, and is without merit, totally baseless. The focus should be on the Immigration Department and the Attorney General's office. What legal advice was given to the Immigration Department? In fact, had they seek legal advice before they went on to detain the Sri Lankans for between 316 and 320 days while the police conduct their investigation. And the other discussion that we should be having is if it is time for the Immigration Department, given the prevalence in illegal entries of persons into this country, if it is time for the Immigration Department to have its own legal consultant at its fingertips. Or even further, if the department, the director of immigration, should be someone with a legal background. I think this is where the conversation should direct its energies, or those criticizing should direct their energies rather than criticizing the court that, in my view, follow the law. I often say, and I will say again in conclusion, that we are a country of laws, not of men. Here is where I will leave it today. I thank you for watching, and I will see you in another episode.